Jujutsu Kaisen has ended, and people are evidently fighting over it. Or, well, they were fighting because by the time I upload this video, no one cares about this whole thing anymore. You know, Bell's Internet Explorer arrived happy, pandemic, I don't know, forget it, the best ending in history, the worst ending in history, etc., etc. Although I think no one has said the first thing. But are we really facing such a bad ending? Or is it simply an ending befitting the work? And people are just realizing that Jujutsu, while it's a work that's good, was never all that. Let's find out in this video. Over the past few years, the word mediocre has taken on a mostly negative connotation. But if we go to the literal definition of the word, we are talking about an adjective that qualifies a noun as something average, neither good nor bad. However, the negative connotation of this word comes from the fact that even though mediocrity implies a middle point, it also implies that what we are qualifying is neither good enough nor bad enough. Or in other words, it is not special at all, which can be interpreted as an attack, considering the qualifier as something that does not stand out in anything. And I feel that many people have started to feel offended when we say that Jujutsu Kaisen falls into the category of mediocre, because they immediately assume that mediocrity carries a negative character, when in most cases it is not. It simply alludes to the fact that if we start looking at the work and everything it offers us with objective eyes, it gives us absolutely nothing. The work which recently ended offers us something unique and superior to what other works have previously provided. And there's quite a debate about whether this work was the great masterpiece or a monumental mess for the industry. I want to contribute my perspective on the issue and perhaps make a small profit too. After all, I could have released weekly videos, talking about absolutely all the chapters and have gotten a good amount of views. But I do it now because of Internet Explorer. Anyway, I want to contribute my bit. To say that, from my perspective, Jujutsu Kaisen is not, and was never, a perfect work or a super mega work, nor a horrifying one. It is, and mostly always was, just an ordinary work, with its strong points, its weak points, its midpoints. In short, neither very good nor very bad. It was fine, and it always was fine. But I'm going to expand on this point quite a bit, talking about several things that I think are worth highlighting. So, to show you that I'm not that bad, let's start by talking about the good things. 1, the characters. That's right, I'm going to talk about the characters of the work as a positive point, but not all of them. Yeah? If we make a scorecard of good and bad characters, the result is 69-5 in favor of the good ones. It's worth noting that the characters I'll mention now are excellent, especially compared to the rest of the cast. In another work, they would be decent characters, leaning towards good, but considering how things are, here they are, the pick of the work. So I'll start with the most obvious one, Satoru Goyo. I have a full video about this character on the channel already, so I'll keep it brief here. I can now use all the manga material released since my last video. My interpretation of the character was that, well, he was a living hydrogen bomb. All the villain's plans in the work were literally based on locking him up, containing him, or separating him from the battlefield. Because they knew perfectly well that if Goyo were present, any plan that was underway would go to hell. Because this guy was invincible. However, behind that perfection that the character showed, both to his students and to his fellow sorcerers, he concealed the immense pain of being viewed by all as merely a weapon, but also the deep paradox of being the strongest and not having the ability to save those who matter to you. Something that Levi from Shingeki no Kyojin did, but better. After all, we must remember that he reached his prime in the Hidden Inventory arc. He couldn't do something as simple as supporting his best friend. That best friend who had taught him something beyond, outside of those walls of the Goyo clan, who educated him to be an all-powerful, perfect god, who had inherited the 6 eyes and the infinite. The power of a god in the mind of a simple man. And his conclusion was just as tragic. The last chapter shows us that image that he constantly had to pretend in front of everyone as a perfect and invincible being. And it was only in front of his student Yuji that he could admit, and if he could allow, to act with more calmness. And to say that, indeed, the Nidoin was simply to appear as the invincible Papo, but in reality, there was some uncertainty inside his head. This, honestly, was very clear. You didn't have to be Sherlock Holmes to realize it. But I think Gege, just in case the demon of reading comprehension attacks, put this into, well, 100% confirm it, even though we all already knew this. For instance, it occurs when Goyo stated in front of his crib that Fushiguro doesn't. People said it couldn't be Goyo, calling him a shitty character for saying he doesn't care. They also dismissed Fushiguro as nonsense, when, indeed, what he was trying to do is intimidate his crib a bit, showing that he didn't care if he had to step over Fushiguro. But, well, everyone goes at their own pace, it's okay. But as he was the great Goyo, Satoru couldn't allow the companions who trusted their lives in him to see him with signs of weakness. And with his death, things didn't go well either. He couldn't fulfill that role for which he had prepared after being released from confinement, which was to defeat Sukuna. He was split in half before his trusting students, only to be desecrated and literally used as a last resort weapon by poor Yuta. And in the end, when everything was over, it seems that only Yuji remembers him as something more than just the strongest sorcerer. I truly believe that Goyo is one of the few characters in this work who genuinely could be in a higher category work, let's say, and still be considered as a notable and complex character. Another genuinely good character in the series is Choso, who I believe you all should already be familiar with. Video on the channel too, by the way, very good, recommended. That one born from that feeling of brotherhood as a result of the horrible experiments that Camo, who tried to create aberrations against humanity, did with the sole purpose of finding a kind of superior race in humans themselves, with hybrids of these latter with curses, resulting in the cursed wombs and Choso himself. The older brother who was willing to give everything for those brothers who were his only calm in these centuries of silence. Locked in those jars in those crude and aberrant forms in which they remained for centuries. But upon leaving, his own weakness forced him to oppose the sorcerers, causing, from his perspective, the death of his beloved brothers. And upon discovering that he had another living brother, that this last one was completely alone. After the Shibuya incident, he chooses to be a supportive older brother and remain by his sibling's side. It didn't matter that he was the one who killed his two brothers. The information they had put them in a compromising situation, there was no intention of malice beyond survival, something that Choso understood perfectly, without behaving like a complete hormonal brute, fighting to protect the only family he had left. He then devoted himself completely to fighting against his own father and creator, being saved at the last second by Yuki and being recognized as a human, until he met his end in the battle against Sukuna, fighting for what he believed was right, protecting his brother Itadori until the end. And not just him, but all the brothers he had swallowed to fight with more power. All those brothers who now lived within him. It was Choso who gave his life to protect his brothers. While I believe his death could have been avoided from a scriptwriting standpoint, considering he was the only blood family left for Yuji, I thought it was nice anyway that his last action in life was to protect his brother, something we already suspected would happen. Just like a brother would do, just like a human would do. Isn't it beautiful? Well, watch out, because surprisingly, there are still a couple of good characters left. Another one, Okotsu Yuta. Video on the channel too. By the way, the boy cursed by love, who managed to overcome that curse and turn it into his strength, becoming one of the most powerful sorcerers today. He disappeared from most of Shibuya until the end, where he fights with some randoms in the cooling games. In the final stretch of the work, he sacrifices himself to use his dying master's body in a last attempt to weaken the final boss. Or was that what we believed? Because in the last chapters, it turns out that Yuta was alive and kicking in his little body. And look, I'm not going to deny the fact that if Yuta had died, it would have been much better, considering that the action he took was so extreme that it even seems cursed to me. He lives on as if nothing happened, with no consequences beyond a scar that even looks good on him. Also, as I say, it would have added much more weight to the body swap. That ugly whole thing that momentarily broke the internet, which would have implied Yuta's final and real sacrifice. But ultimately, I think it was taken too lightly, like, hey, Yuta, how funny. Do you remember the time when somehow they took your brain out and put it in a corpse? I don't know, little things that happen to one, right? Maybe I'm weird, but what does Yuta's survival add to the work? In my opinion, not much. It is what it is, but as we said, let's focus on the good and continue with that plan. Nanami is another great character with a well-executed introduction, intense development, and a satisfying conclusion that remained untarnished throughout the work. Iconic character for showing one thing working is crap. But most importantly, he excelled in his role as an adult sorcerer in a world filled with teenage sorcerers who had their whole lives ahead of them. He knew perfectly well that he should prioritize their lives over his own. In the Shibuya arc, he repeatedly showed concern for the young ones until his inevitable demise. A character with a rather minor role, but who contributed a lot in the short time he was there. Finally, I will discuss Toji and Geto in this section, referring to Geto himself, not Kenjaku. First, Toji, the ultimate worker who challenged himself to defeat the most powerful sorcerer in history, and he died breaking his golden rule of not working for free. His job was to eliminate Amanai, defeat Goyo and Geto. It was only because they were getting in the way of his job, but when he had already been paid? Instead of retiring with the payment, he chooses to challenge himself by attempting to defeat a sorcerer. Just to prove that he could, even take down the strongest sorcerer. Spoiler, he ended up donated, the gods of Olympus have donated me. But then he had the courage and will to return, taking the body of that young man. The old random caused quite a few problems in Shibuya, and even eliminated Dagon effortlessly, arriving at the scene in front of his son. Upon learning that he was not only in front of him, but that the latter had kept the surname of his late mother, and not from the clan. Zenin, who despised so much in life, decides to free his son from that fight, ending his own life. Not even from jokes as complex as those mentioned before. But it's a character that I genuinely like and everyone likes. A character with a genuinely short participation, whose contribution was gigantic. The butterfly effect caused by his intervention in the hidden inventory events is noteworthy. Geto is a special case. It's intriguing that a character who only appeared briefly in a flashback of the prequel arc was given such extensive and impactful treatment. That man defeated by a monkey with no cursed energy. Had he realized the horror of protecting a humanity that couldn't even coexist with itself? After realizing that the existence of those beings inferior to him was what caused the very existence of the curses that tormented them, he thinks that perhaps the best option is simply to eliminate those who do not contribute to the world of sorcery. Throughout, he maintained his friendship with Goyo, despite their initial apparent differences in character. He was that carefree dreamer with great power who simply lived for himself, who didn't even take what he did seriously at all. Recalling what we said earlier, he was raised to be an all-powerful god, and he behaved as such. While Geto was someone more idealistic, calmer, and genuinely cared that everything went well, but then things change. Goyo would realize that his power was superior to anyone else's, and he would start to be more narcissistic than before. He stopped paying attention to everyone around him, even his best friend, causing the latter to fall into absolute depression. Seeing how those he was supposed to save were monsters equal to or worse than the curses he was supposed to exterminate. And it wasn't until he saw how his best friend fell into absolute darkness that Goyo began to change, for better and for worse. In itself, the Hidden Inventory arc, although many consider it to be the arc of Goyo's past. If you look at it again, you'll realize that it's more the arc of Geto's fall, because all the pieces are placed there to show precisely how is it that this sorcerer who appeared so idealistic suddenly becomes a damn lunatic who wants to eliminate everyone who is not like him. I've extensively discussed the characters I consider truly good in the work apart from the rest. So now let's talk about number 2, the Shibuya Arc. That's right, the arc that everyone said was the pinnacle of shonen. And honestly, while it was good, maybe people were going a little overboard with it. There are things that people exaggerated, and of course there are. But no one can deny, however, that it is a brave and quite groundbreaking arc in several ways, compared to what we were used to in shonen. Killing off several characters, giving us damn crazy and unpredictable fights, giving the protagonist a character development from another world, and allowing us to see several characters from the work show their skills on the battlefield. That being said, even though it may seem silly, I do feel that Novara's resurrection takes away a couple of points from the arc. Although it must be said that it was clear that Novara was going to return because his wound, although serious, was never said to be fatal. It was said that Novara was likely lurking around there. And well, the truth is that it didn't catch me by surprise, it rather made me laugh the way he came back. And it must be said that in Shibuya, it wasn't random characters introduced 3 chapters ago who died. I mean, yes, characters who were literally introduced in that arc did die. Like the old man, that leader of the Zenin family. But also important characters that we had met before died. Nanami and Nobara are examples of that, and although Nanami is still up there in the sky, well, Nobara came back. But hey, it's just a couple of points less. Although I say this more than anything, almost out of obligation. Because I always knew that Nobara was going to come back. Maybe I would have been surprised if Nanami had come back and I would say what a mess, but Nobara, well, more or less, I was always prepared for her to come back. Look, I'll tell you one thing. I expected Nobara to come back more than Fushiguro after the assimilation of his cradle. Anyway, the arc has many things laughing, as I say, like the damn Megumi invoking Maharaga to kill a random. We will also talk about that later. But honestly, Shibuya remains as an above average arc. And speaking of Shibuya, we have to talk about number 3, the battles. Okay, here I'm going to be a little more neutral because honestly, the Jujutsu Kaisen manga itself has fights that are very good and fights that are quite incomprehensible. Mostly it's because the drawing work is not that good, but at least the fights tend to be better than average. For example, Konyaku versus Takaba was cool. Although it should also be said that they are greatly elevated by their animation in the anime. But here I want to talk only about the manga, since the anime is a slightly different world and will slightly alter the perception we have of the manga. The Jujutsu Kaisen manga hasn't gained as much popularity as the anime adaptation. On that note, number 4, Goyo versus Sukuna. Yes, I honestly think this was a great fight. Not only because it's an overwhelming potential for the animators when it comes time to adapt this thing, or labor exploitation, but because it's the culmination of the work's skills. Everything that has been established about the two most powerful beings is perfectly reflected here. In this fight, there are absolutely no limits. Both are monsters with unlimited power, and they show it to the fullest. All the power systems that were established for us before, all the techniques, all the much text we swallowed were for this moment. It was a small training, a display of power worthy of, as the manga itself told us, the strongest sorcerer in history against the strongest sorcerer of the present. However, can you tell that Gege struggles to convey feelings? That fight is simply a fight. All the moments when the author tries to generate feeling during the fight, it feels quite dry. That's why they say Jujutsu doesn't have a soul and such. It's more than anything Gege's fault that it's noticeable he struggles to convey. Is it very bad or bad? I don't know what it is in that section, but well, I think I've already said all the positive things I had to say about the work. So it's time to talk about Cha-Cha-Cha-Chan, the bad number 1, the potential weight. Dude, you're gonna see. Dude, Gege is cooking, dude. Kenyakuya arrives tomorrow, dude. Now that the official manga has ended with no sequel announced, we can discuss this. What a shitty characters the work gave us. Many characters that it sold us as the mere dick, that would be incredible in the future or with promising abilities. What happened? A lot of shit unfinished or concluded in a very poor way? It's true that this doesn't affect me as much. I'm not going to be hypocritical because I didn't care about these subplots or these little things. And even though I know it's wrong as a writer, not closing them doesn't bother me that much. But since I know it bothers you a lot, I have to mention it. Hakari versus Urahume was a disappointing fight, with only 10 panels shown, and half of those from the end of the battle, when the Fen boy disintegrated upon seeing his master boyfriend die. The American army arrived, and their actions were unclear, possibly involving consuming onigiris and sake. Kenyaku's plan to merge Tengen with humanity into a super creature died with him. I thought that would be the final boss, but it turned out to be Sukuna, Itadori's family, and the inheritance of Sukuna's lineage. What do you... Caught it. Those from the Kyoto school, some damn randoms useless for whom Mekamaru gave his life. Throughout the play, they did nothing but feel sorry. Only the cat does nothing. Mei was the only one who acted, sacrificing herself so Maki could eliminate the clan. I must admit that. Great. The fucking Noritoshi, finishing the sacrifice games. And the bastard, he went to another place with his family to live life. Nobara and her big comeback. Who cares what happened to Goyo's clan? Fuck sorcery, as he used to say. There it was, one of the coldest, blandest, most tasteless, cringe-inducing, weird, and parentless comebacks that I've seen in my life. Megumi's sister, introduced at the start of the story, was possessed by a Heian-era prostitute and killed off within 2 chapters. And speaking of that, number 2, Megumi Fushiguro. Damn, brother, the potential man. We've seen that nearly the entire work is pure potential, but this guy takes it to another level. The modern Saz, some said, or even the improved Aki from Chainsaw Man, others said. And I really can't understand how it's even possible to have written such a bland, pathetic character, so devoid of any kind of quality that makes him even minimally memorable. This character's fan base consists solely of young girls who are attracted to him. How can you create a character like this and make him a member of your main protagonist trio? Is Sakura from Naruto a better character than Fushiguro Megumi? Really, Megumi seems like the character who appeared in the background of the series, whose relevance is limited to a couple of random dialogues, while the real protagonists do their stuff and develop properly over time. Megumi's situation is unspeakable considering he is the son of one of the most broken characters in the manga. It is established that Kira inherited one of his clan's most broken techniques. By the time he met Yuji, Kira had mastered it. Yes, he had been away from sorcery for a very long time, and it wasn't until his sister fell into a coma that he decided to start using it. Blah, blah, blah. Don't underestimate me. Your ability was the most flawed, and your master was the mightiest and most capable sorcerer. Are you really telling me that there has never been an instance where you could talk to your master to try to unleash that hidden potential of the demon you had? Because it's not like from the time Megumi ventured into sorcery until he was possessed by Sukuna, only a week has passed. It was months in which this guy made no progress in his abilities. He mentions releasing the Major Raga in central Shibuya, aware of its capabilities. And on top of that, against a random who could have thrown the big wolf at him that one. It's a stupid thing, but it wins. The poor guy was bleeding out. It's obvious he wasn't thinking clearly. Let's see how fucking crazy he is. Do you have to be there to consider as a viable alternative to drop an atomic bomb on a guy you could defeat with a puppy? Because he even had enough lucidity as to remember how Goyo told him he had the potential to beat him. He had enough lucidity to mentally bid farewell to Yuji, knowing that invoking the adaptable would lead to his demise. And then, in the cooling games, he did nothing, but he wins. Don't you remember the fight he had with nothing? Nothing, shut up, nothing. And then Sukuna came, possessed him, and there was Potential Man. As a vessel for his bitch, and fucking Sukuna came, took his techniques, buffed himself, and that's it. Then he was freed from his control and the manga ends. Everything Megumi was supposedly predestined for and all the foreshadowing about his potential in the work. It was just so the viewer could see why Sukuna wanted his body. And this shitty character, bland, tasteless, and completely unnecessary, is the perfect example of waste of space and of oxygen. A character for whom many things were proposed, but none came to fruition. In fact, I'm damn impressed by how poorly written this guy is. Number 3, too much text. It may seem cliche to say, but Gege, it's truly unnecessary. We're not interested in the damn specific explanations you give about magical abilities. I already understood that the damn devil's technique is justified with the demon's bone. I already understood. Let go of my arm. I'm not interested anymore. I reached a point where I stopped reading. I just took everything for granted. Whenever I saw an explanation, I thought it wasn't worth reading as it would just justify why everything is okay. And I'm going to ignore it because I'm not going to read a lesson in metaphysics. Why? Does Goyo's void make the devil of Voltereta appear to Itadori and say, imagine we are in a forest, I'm not interested, let go of my arm? But Vince, the explanations of the power system is what makes this work so fascinating. Are you really telling me that you prefer to read many text boxes explaining abilities? That will be used only a few times in the most ridiculously complicated ways. Instead of seeing how the characters of your supposedly favorite work interact with each other, generating a chemistry that can be used to their advantage later. Really, look, one of the advantages that manga and comics offer, unlike a book, is that you don't need to be so descriptive. Why do you have damn bitches? Images? Simple explanations would have been easier and more attractive than absurdly long and complex ones. And that the complexity lies in its use, and in how the author draws the skills being used. I could have many things against Chainsaw Man Part 2. It's truly terrible and disgusting. Mentioning it is so repulsive. But Part 1 is far superior to this manga. As for the reading pace, like the succession of events, there's no comparison. Porygon Man gets the point. I'm done discussing Chainsaw Man. Enough, no more. In manga, the text is simple and concise, while the visual narrative carries the story, which is crucial. Otherwise, one might as well write a novel. The author seems to lack confidence in the reader's ability to comprehend the events, leading to overly detailed explanations. I understand, as some skills are quite complex. It's evident that the author lacks the skill to develop interpersonal relationships between characters without relying heavily on conversations that serve as veiled explanations. Although if we talk about not knowing how to write interpersonal relationships, we definitely have to talk about number 4, the cooling games or sacrifice games. Oh my god, and we've created it, a monster. I've never seen a roller coaster go up and down so quickly, abruptly. Coming from Shibuya and entering this is the equivalent of watching a movie whose first 30 minutes are pick for the next 50 minutes. They are the most abominable and tasteless thing, making you doubt if the first 30 minutes were part of the same work. Was it a hallucination from alcohol? The Sacrifice Games arc is terrible for many reasons. For having meaningless fights with inconsequential characters that have nothing special about them. Except for Yuji versus Higuruma, Choso and Yuki versus Kenyaku, and Naoya versus Maki. The rest of the arc are senseless fights that contribute absolutely nothing. Not even the damn fight where Utah gets involved. This arc had something special despite the lack of significant events. Nonetheless, it was more engaging than the manga's beginning. The most important part of the arc was the introduction of Angel, the fight against Kenyaku, where Yuki died, and the liberation of Goyo, which concludes the arc and begins the Shinjuku arc, or the final battle. The rest of Jujutsu Kaisen, although seemingly filler, took years to complete. Once finished, it magically gained widespread popularity. Ever since the damn albino came out of the damn shit cube. When the first season of the Jujutsu Kaisen anime ended, fans were incredibly enthusiastic about the series and the Shibuya Arc. However, when the Sacrifice Games arc began and the plot started to progress, people rapidly lost interest. Goyo's return magically woke everyone up, and they returned as if they had been crazy about the Sacrifice Games for years. I'm not an exception. I tried catching up with Jujutsu multiple times, but only got into it when Goyo returned and the fight with Sukuna started. I had a strong motivation to catch up because before it was a nightmare. And hey, since we're connecting the dots with phrases I say, let's talk about the real horror. Number 5, the usual ones. The fandom in recent years, few fandoms have been more intense than that of Jujutsu, but above all, I have not met a more hypocritical fandom. Boku no Hero ends, people don't like its ending. Jujutsu fans saying ku kareku. Creating horrifying fan arts of things that never happened. Did anyone say anything bad about Jujutsu during the Sacrifice Games? Everyone shut up. Did anyone say anything bad about Jujutsu after Gojo's return? Regarding the TikToks of Hikari's dances and Yuji's skyfall in the snow, some individuals dox and send death threats for expressing dislike of the content. I have no proof. It's just a guess. But when an official page of the manga leaks showing that everything was a cycle, everyone jumps off the damn ship. But when other pages leak showing that Sukuna did have some development, he was always good. Really? What a horrible fandom. I don't know why people don't have a middle ground. I mean, fandoms with manga endings only have two moods. Either they hate it and despise it as much as possible, tearing down the entire work just because they didn't like the ending. Something I find childish and slobbery. Or they stay on the ship, no matter what happens, without saying anything negative. Man, there can be middle grounds, believe me. I'm a pretty big fan of Jujutsu. I enjoy the manga and don't think the ending is that bad. I think it's average for its series. But I'm not going to be kissing its feet, nor saying it's crap. Neither one nor the other. Brothers, is there a middle ground on the internet, really? Can you try it? But speaking of fandoms, number 6, conformity. I firmly believe that those who defend Jujutsu Kaisen as a hyper-mega shonen should read more things. Honestly, the layer of conformity I've witnessed lately seems quite depressing. There were a lot of people saying that one of the strongest points of its cradle was that. Modern villains often have deep motives and philosophical thoughts, but his cradle was simply chaos. Suddenly, that changed. Sukuna had always been bullied and sought vengeance against the world that despised him. And there was the villain who was supposedly revolutionary, although I don't know how revolutionary it is for a villain to be simply bad. But anyway, this is the least of it. What's really shocking is that while there are people who are indeed complaining about it, there are others who don't seem to have realized that there are many. Not to mention all the subplots or concepts that were introduced during the work were either wasted or not used at all. And I see people genuinely saying that Jutsu doesn't need to over-explain any of that, and that the work itself is good, without needing to resort to giving clear answers to everything. And look, I feel morally obligated to say that you are not right. But, despite everything, it's that the subplots were worth a lot to me. And the truth is, if the plots had been closed, my final score on the manga and the ending wouldn't have changed much. Number 7. Character relationships. I won't elaborate further as I've already explained much of this previously. It seems Gege lacks skill in writing interpersonal relationships. I suspect he's never had a friend. Unless it's a friendship with homoerotic undertones like Goyo and Geto's, which was good. Any kind of relationship or friendship between the characters in the work. It's either from original anime setups like the Yu Yu shorts or new scenes altogether. And if it's not that, it's banal conversations that the characters have accompanied by walls of text. In fact, this problem can be seen in the end. Half of the first chapter is a desperate attempt by Gege to give us a cute scene of interaction from the protagonist trio. But doesn't it feel unnecessary, boring, heavy, and filler-like? He just doesn't achieve it. Gege tries, I see the intention, but he just doesn't achieve it. He's not that good at writing. Number 8, the power system. Pointed out. Conductor, power system. I guess it's okay. The criticism suggests that the constant explanations of the power system detract from other aspects of the work. Geije bothered so much to explain so much fucking shit about how the energy ball works, from the devil, from the demon, and he forgot to develop his fucking characters. It's unfortunate. Number 9, the Heian era. Someone will need to clarify why Gage is so fixated on this. Obsessed whatever with this era, and on top of that, he never did anything with it. A mini arc focused on Sukuna's past, explaining his origins, power, discrimination, and how he became who he is, would have countered the argument that Sukuna was a bad villain. The hidden inventory arc is one of the best in the whole anime, at least in my opinion. It would have been interesting to explore further. In my opinion, showing Sukuna's past through drawings would have been much better and more interesting than simply cramming all that context into heavy dialogues. Yes, there are brief flashbacks to that era, but those flashbacks provide much more context about people other than Sukuna. And well, regarding the conclusion of this last one, we could touch on the best. And now it's time for number 10, the final chapter. That's right, the final chapter. Finally, after so many years, the work is finished, and how did it end? Well, as one would expect, just as mediocre. The chapter begins with a case that the boys were solving since the end of the previous chapter. It turns out that they have to capture a sorcerer. They capture him, and that's it. Oh, for God's sake, don't look. I have written a summary on my face to tell it in the video. Make you a summary. But you know what? Screw it. I'm going to skip it. It really is very shitty. I don't care about anything. Let's go to Goyo's part. Noticing the sorcerer's remorse over his choices, Yuji recalls his final talk with Goyo. This demonstrates that Sukuna not only lacked confidence in his ability to win, but also felt uneasy about being utilized as a weapon. So Yuji tells him, son, recognizing that you're wrong is the first step. You're doing well. The guys leave and Mahito appears in a strange limbo asking Sukuna, you wanted revenge because they called you ugly, right? Sukuna realizes that while he chose revenge and enjoyed it, there was another path. He acknowledges his weakness and admits defeat. He departs with his fanboy, prepared to start a new life. The survivors are then shown continuing with their lives. The last finger of his cradle, where Yuji originally found it. The latter also mentions that since the other 19 fingers vanished, keeping this final one nearby shouldn't be an issue. Conclusion. In the end, I give it a 6.5 out of 10, and to the manga, as a global score, I'm going to give it a 7. Honestly, I think the score is more than fair. It's what I truly believe for me. It's a manga that is slightly above average, but still mediocre. That's why the 7, because it's a bit above what we're used to. I think its fame is a bit undeserved, and it put a weight on its shoulders that it really shouldn't have. We shouldn't have put those expectations on Jujutsu just because it became famous. It was always a fairly mediocre work, oscillating between 5 and 7. It remained consistent, never dropping below or exhibiting any beastly quality peaks. I honestly think that Jujutsu Kaisen is going to be a work that is going to fall into deep oblivion, and that its greatest curse? Never better said. In Jujutsu Kaisen, its enormous fame devoured the manga. Without this fame, it would have been a decent manga without pain or glory. But that burden on the shoulders of being the successor of Naruto, competitor of, I don't know, of Boku, no hero of One Piece, all of this put a burden on Gege that he was not prepared to bear. Anyway, as I say this, I think it's going to be the last thing I ever talk about Jujutsu Kaisen on the channel I Want and Hope. Reading Jujutsu Kaisen wasn't a bad journey. It's a manga somewhat better than average, and I don't regret it. A 7 isn't bad, and I didn't dislike the 6.5 ending, so I'll leave it at that. As I always said, it was a nice journey to live it with the fandom, month after month, week after week. But the cycle ends here now, as we will have to move on to the next things. I tell you, just take care of yourselves and always remember, you were the Jujutsu Kaisen.